U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is backing the president's threat to slap a 10% tariff on $300 billion of Chinese imports that will start in September. He also reiterated the United States' readiness to resume talks with North Korea.
Meanwhile, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and other Republicans are calling on Secretary Pompeo to run for the U.S. Senate in Kansas. According to senior national security correspondent for the Intercept, Jim Risen, Mike Pompeo is one of the only high-profile officials in the U.S. national security apparatus who has cracked the code of flourishing under President Trump. He joins us now to expand on this, and in addition to his role at the Intercept, he serves as director of the press of the Freedom Defense Fund. Welcome to Jim.
Great to see you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Great journalist, somebody I've been reading for a long time. Jim,
Indeed.
I guess tell us really about how you see Pompeo as having learned to crack the code of flourishing under Trump. We've seen a lot of his other national security officials swatted aside, what have you. What is it about him that makes him unique?
Well, I think this is raises some real serious questions about Pompeo. I think he has decided, maybe from his own personality, that he is willing to do what other senior national security officials weren't willing to do, which was enable Trump and go along with Trump's worst instincts. And Trump has found someone who is willing to listen to him and to do what he wants and to say all the right things, unlike Jim Mattis or McMaster or some of the other people who just couldn't put up with Trump's, both his weirdness and his egotism and his racism. And I think that Pompeo has figured out that if he puts up with all that, finds ways to go along with it, that he can get a lot of power within the Trump orbit. It's what we should have all expected, I guess, at the beginning, was that somebody was going to emerge as the person who would go along with all of Trump's crap, and then find a way to use that, leverage that to gain power throughout the administration.
Yeah.
And he's emerged as the one person who has been able to do that while also managing the bureaucracy. And so when he was CIA director, he met personally with a conspiracy theorist that Trump saw on Fox News and asked him to meet with, because
Who is it?
Bill Binney,
Yeah.
who was a former NSA official, who is a nice guy, but who has kind of gone into conspiracy theorist mode. Binney believed that the DNC hack was done by an insider, someone like Seth Rich. He believed all of the conspiracy theories about how the DNC hack happened. He went on Fox News and talked about that. Trump saw him on TV and told Pompeo, you got to meet with this guy. This is the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, and he agreed to do it. And he brought in the guy to the 7th floor of the CIA and sat down with him for an hour to talk about the conspiracy theories. And he said, yeah, I'll look into that.
That's insane.
And that's the kind of thing that Pompeo has been willing to do that other people like Mattis and these other people who have now left weren't willing to do.
But what's the tangible effect of that? Like, he brings a guy in for an hour, and I mean,
well,
like,
see, I think in
right?
Pompeo's mind, what he's doing is trivial, but gets him in good with Trump. And maybe that's true, but it also means that you are willing and able to politicize the intelligence process, and you don't mind.
But what
does Pompeo want? Like, what is
Power.
How do people understand his ideology, though? Like, in terms of his foreign policy goals, what are they?
I think he wants personal power. I think he wants to be president. And
But he's not very ideological, or he's actually very ideological. Sorry, it's the opposite of that.
I think that
he's quite a neoconservative in his outlook, and all the reporting I've seen says the man forcefully pushes the Bolton line inside the Oval Office. Now, like many secretaries of state.
You brought up a fascinating point. That is the rivalry that's developing between Bolton and Pompeo is really the one to watch within the national security area, because Pompeo, I think, is much better at this game than Bolton is. Bolton has been like a stopped clock. He's been saying the same thing for 20 years.
It's a little cartoonish almost.
Yes, we've got to go to war with everybody all the time. and there's evidence that even Trump has seen through that and doesn't really listen to Bolton, and that Pompeo, as a result, is somewhat more subtle in his neoconservatism. And so he's the one that Trump seems to listen to. I think the whole thing about Ratcliffe and the DNI job that everybody missed was that Trump didn't care about that guy. That job to Trump was irrelevant. He has Mike Pompeo as his head of intelligence. You know, when he left the CIA to go to the State Department, I was told that Trump said, "You've got to keep watching over the CIA," and he said, "Sure, I'll do that." So basically, he's been monitoring Haspel, Gene Haspel, who was his deputy, while he's at the State Department. So he's accumulated enormous power within the national security area. You just look at the Senate briefings they had on the Khashoggi hearing, on the Khashoggi murder, and he was the one who showed up to talk about the intelligence and not Gina Haspel.
Oh, that's a great point.
So ODNI, though, has always kind of been a problematic position with limited amounts of the Officer Director of National Intelligence, for those not watching in D.C.
Right.
And I think that it's not necessarily because Pompeo has filled that role. I guess more what I'm getting at is there's always a tension between the National Security Advisor and the Secretary of State, going all the way back to Henry Kissinger and all. I mean, this is not. I'm like, what is it about him in particular that makes it unique to this moment? It's endemic to the system, in my opinion.
I think it's always about personality. I mean, like you said, Kissinger dominated first when he was at National Security Advisor, then at Secretary of State, and then he was so powerful they made him both. And so I think it's really a personality-driven thing, and Pompeo has a personality. He's very smart, and I think he's very calculating, and I think he has figured out a way to get Trump to listen to him and let him do the things that he wants to do, but that also feed Trump's ego. And I think he's walking a very fine line, because if you enable Trump and all of his predilections, which are not only bad but weird, you will eventually, it's kind of like riding a tiger. How long can you do that?
What is the impact on American foreign policy then?
I think it leads to greater and greater chaos, because what I think is going on is that Pompeo wants to run for president. He is emerged as I think that's why he's not going back to the Senate and why he wants to stay at the Secretary of State. He's trying to position himself, I believe, as Trump's heir. And I think you'll see, he's dominating the national security area. I think at some point, if Trump wins re-election, that he will take even a bigger role. I mean, I think at that point, it'll become a rivalry between him and Pence for the successor role to Trump.
Yeah, we don't really know where that's going to go. I mean, maybe it's like what Henry Clay wanted to be Secretary of State because that was the jumping off point, but it didn't really work out under Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. She thought that was going to be a good jumping off point.
It doesn't, but I think it's actually a bad political calculation, which you're not really in the political process. You actually quite literally can't be in the political process as Secretary of State.
But I think the interesting thing that Pompeo is doing, and it hasn't gotten much attention in the press, is he's using this as a platform to dominate the entire national security area. And as I said, McMaster, Mattis, Kelly, they're all gone.
Right.
And he has now emerged as he's the only one left. He's the last man standing. So
maybe he just agrees with Trump. That's one thing I wonder, which is maybe
I think he does
with his outlook on the world.
What is Trump's outlook on the world? I mean, it changes every 5 minutes.
Yeah, I think there's an underlying just skepticism of globalization and a particular skepticism of European countries.
And yet, as you said, he has neoconservatives dominating his national security apparatus. Bolton is the most neoconservative person on the planet. He wants to go to war with Iran. He wants to go to war with North Korea. He wants to go to war with probably Cuba. I mean, so how do you square that with Trump saying, I want to get out of the world? And Pompeo, I think, is trying to walk that fine line. Satisfy Trump, maintain some kind of neoconservative foreign agenda of his own, but be in between Bolton and Trump.
Yeah.
With the ultimate goal being his own power.
Yes, that's what I think.
Well, it's interesting.
Jim, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks,
Always
Jim.
great to
Appreciate
have
it.
you.
Take care.
Coming up, Democratic candidates call for a re-examining of political rhetoric in the wake of this weekend's mass shootings.
And we chart where each 2020 candidate can trace their biggest supporters to. Team Rising will weigh in on all of this next.